Welcome to the Irish Baptist College podcast, Let's Talk. I'm your host, Davy Ellison. I'm the Director of Training here at the college, and I am here with the Principal, Dr. Jonathan McLaughlin. So good to have you with us, Johnny.
Good to be here, Davy.
We have another standalone episode. We are going to talk a little bit. Well, we didn't expect to do this episode, Johnny.
It's a bonus.
It's a bonus episode. We've been propositioned with a few questions, and we're going to take a few moments to dig into it. So we've been given 5 objections to studying at a Bible college, doing theological education in person as we do here. And so we're going to take a little bit of time back and forward just to answer these objections.
Sure. It'll be the final word on them, Davy.
Well, we can have a go and see what happens. So the first one is a common one, and I think you and I have heard this regularly over the last year and longer. Theological education is too expensive. So what is your reaction whenever someone says that, or how do you process that? Think about that in response.
Well, I think it's an honest objection. I think it's a fair objection. I would take a step back, Davy, and go, most of the things in life that are really beneficial are often hard to get and often not cheap to get. So even with my own children, I'll talk about even when they're studying, preparing for exams, to get past your exams, to get through your exams, you need to work hard, and that doesn't come easy. And then other things that they want to get in life, well, they're not cheap because they're good products. So theological education is really important, and it isn't cheap, but it's really beneficial, and you could nearly say necessary for a lifetime of Christian service. I know we've talked in other podcasts, there are rare exceptions like Spurgeon and Lloyd Jones, incredible people that God raised up who are huge exceptions to the rule. So I think it's necessary, I think it's essential, and because it's such a good thing, it doesn't come cheap. It's a big investment of time and money. What do you think, Davy?
We're in the same boat, because that's the first thing I wrote down, is that we do need to recognise it is expensive, and for all those reasons that you have outlined. I do think there's benefits to that expense, which you've talked about a little bit, and I think particularly here at the Irish Baptist College, what you're getting is a degree. It's a degree in theology, but it is a recognised degree that can open up doors elsewhere if ministry isn't where you end up. And so that expense is not wasted if you don't end up in full-time vocational ministry. It's a solid degree that'll get you into a graduate programme in a business, or open up doors in teaching or other worlds as well. I think I would also push back a little bit, and you know this, Johnny, since coming in. It is expensive, but it's not as expensive as it could be. Whenever we reflect and think about how much it costs the college to train a student, it's probably in and around £10,000 per year, and we're only charging students around £6,000. Now that's still a lot of money, but we're trying to absorb some of that cost, and the Churches Association help with that, personal donors help with that as well. So I think it is, like we've both recognised, it is expensive, but it's worth it.
Absolutely.
One other thing I'd just like to add as well is that there are lots of people and lots of trusts keen to help students with the cost of theological education, and we know people are regularly in touch with us at the college, and so I think all of the students, their testimony is that the Lord provides, which doesn't take away the expense, but it tends to be covered.
And it's a testing ground, Davy. We've talked about this often ourselves, that if the Lord is calling someone to serve him in a lifetime of gospel ministry, I think part of the testing ground is there's a big financial outlay. You're dependent on other people within your local body of Christ, and also the wider body of Christ. And I actually think it's part of the testing of a potential call.
For sure. Okay. Anything else on that before we move on?
I think we've sorted it there.
Objection number 1 knocked out of the park. Objection number 2. So in today's world, I have access to the best Bible teaching in the world for free online, why would I need to go to a college? So this is true with the internet, with all of the bad stuff that's come along with it. Some great stuff has come along with it, such as access to the best Bible teachers in the world for free. Why come here?
I think, like I did with the first question, Davy, I would need to take a step back and hopefully taking a step forward in answering that question. Somebody in our churches might say, why should I go to church if the best Bible teachers are available all over the world through the click of a button or in my YouTube app? And so I would answer that person to go, well, you need to come to church. Why? Because the Bible commands you to come to church, Hebrews 10. And also the fact of, well, that person who's your pastor, you need to get to know them and they need to get to know you. And, you know, as we've talked about before, the characters of a leader, yes, there's calling and competence, but what about their Christ-like character? So you're not going to get to know the world's best Bible teachers because they live in foreign countries, far away from you. But you need to get to know your pastor, and your pastor needs to get to know you. So I would say there is real similarities then between that illustration and seeking to train for gospel service, because character is paramount. And so to sit in our rooms behind our laptops, watching the best Bible lecturing in the world with no character formation with the person teaching us or students in a classroom, I think we're really short-circuiting the process that God's designed. What do you think, Davy?
Exactly that. I think the key aspect of being shaped for ministry happens in community. So you can't get that alone. And even if you're on some kind of Zoom call or something and you are at least interacting with people, it's not the same as seeing them day in, day out, rubbing shoulders, having those conversations. And so there's no way, okay, in a technical kind of way, you might be getting the best Bible teaching, but you're not utilizing the best context in which to enjoy that Bible teaching, which is in person with people on the same trajectory as yourself. Funnily enough, last night in church, I was talking to someone works in the IT business. So we were talking about the work from home policy. And after the pandemic, they had an exclusive work from home policy. And they saw kind of productivity peak about a year and a half after they introduced that. And then they saw it plummet significantly. And he said that part of the problem was, well, people just weren't interacting with other people. They were sitting on their computers all day, every day. And then when they switched off from work, they were switching on their games console and then playing that late into the night. And so there's this reality that we need human interaction. That's how we've been created and designed by God. And I think that's true in training.
Also, if I could add something to that, Davy, in gospel service, we are wanting to be with people face to face.
Hopefully.
So, I mean, and the wonders of technology are great, that we can text people, we can call people, we can have Zoom meetings, but ultimately the best pastoral work happens face to face. And so to be through a theological training centre where the vast majority is face to face with your peers, with your lectures in Christian community, that's surely modelling exactly what we want to do when we get out of here.
Hopefully. And I think one other thing on this is about contextual and cultural awareness. So we have access to great Bible teachers, but they're teaching in a particular context with a particular set of circumstances that are not always applicable to us in terms of ministry here on this island. And I think we've been lulled into this maybe by the publishers who publish guys with a big platform, and they're all coming from, well, the majority are coming from the States, and we can learn much from them, but there's sometimes subtleties and sensitivities that if we just embrace wholehearted, actually they're not going to work well for us in the context in which we find ourselves. Whereas if you are in a college that's in the locale near to where you're going to minister, there's benefit there. Now, there's obviously blind spots, as everybody has, but I think there's a cultural awareness that you get with studying in person with people who have ministered or are ministering in similar contexts that you're going to be ministering in.
And you know, Davy, we've had a lot of those speakers come across to the college over the years, or part of our churches, and you can actually see when you talk with them saying, look, you're in a context where you have 2,000 or 3,000 people going to your church.
Yeah.
The average church on the island of Ireland probably has about maybe 70 members, certainly in our association, and 100 people on Sunday. And when you're talking to them, maybe when they're in the building here or you're driving them around, you actually see them really struggling to compute how their model of biblical ministry will actually flesh out in a normal ministry here on the island of Ireland.
Yeah.
And that, just to pick up on what you're saying, is a huge, there's real discombobulation between those two worlds.
For sure. So I think what we're saying is that you need a fully orbed experience in ministry training with other people in a context that's useful and beneficial and profitable.
So even, Davy, when people are coming back from church council a week or two ago and they're talking about how the council went and how all the local churches were responding, as you know, that overflows into all of our students who are talking about real life contextual ministry that happened at the weekend.
For sure. Okay, objection number 3. There are more accessible study options that enable me still to work in my job. So why, this maybe our residential model, maybe focusing on full-time as well. So how would you respond to prospective students says, well, look, there's more accessible options. I can keep working and I can study. What have you got here that's different?
I think if someone is saying, I don't anticipate giving up my job and taking a job full time in gospel service, I can understand how that's very attractive.
Yeah.
But if somebody says, I feel strongly a call of God that's been supported by my church leadership, and I want now to devote myself to a lifetime of Christian service, I think they need to really cut off many of their former ties of life. And if that's a full-time job, I think they're going to need to really cut that away, David, to be able to focus. But if somebody's saying, well, I really want to be a faithful elder in the church, I want to be a faithful leader in the church, I can see I want to keep my job and I want to look for something flexible. Our master's program helps with that. But if somebody's saying, I am, until the Lord comes back or calls me home, I want to give 30 years to this, I think you need to come and look at a full-time course like what we offer.
Yeah. I think that issue of focus, you've a divided attention if you're trying to keep a job down and do a bit of study, and neither thing gets full attention. And they kind of, both things get partial attention, and that doesn't serve you well if you're preparing for ministry to have that distraction. So like you've articulated, I think I would also say, we do have part-time options, so we can be flexible at both undergrad and postgraduate part-time options. And the key question, like you've outlined, is purpose. What's the end goal? What are you hoping to get out of it at the end? Do you add any more?
No, I think that's...
Yeah, I think I would also want to push people who think about this. Is keeping that job a bit of a safety net or kind of risk aversion? And I suppose I'd want to push gently and say, well, look, are you all out for this, or are you kind of holding out? You kind of and that's not to say that we need to be take unnecessary risks. You want to take biblical risks and good risks, but you also want to be sensible and wise and prudent. But sometimes I feel that's kind of keeping a foot in both camps and hedging your bets. And I wonder if people need to choose one or the other.
Just add 2 comments to your comment. David, you say, well, Piper's written a good book called Risk is Right. It's just a short little book. I would encourage people to read that. Risk is Right. And also thinking about Matthew chapter 4, where our motto was, as a college, is Lord, I follow. And that was very much the experience of those fishermen, Simon Peter, and the Lord said, come follow me. And the text says he left everything and followed him. And so there is that sense in which sometimes people have to maybe just abandon their former lifestyle or a large part of their former life, where, like Simon Peter, he left his fishing trade. And I think he was an extremely successful businessman. Some people think, well, yes, they were unschooled, ordinary men. They must surely have been with Jesus. Yes, that's what we read in Acts. But I do think they were extremely successful businessmen who left that lifestyle of success to say, I now need to follow Christ exclusively in this call.
It's funny, I'm only after finishing reading a book about the Guinness family.
Okay.
And I never knew this. So there's kind of 3 lineages from the Guinness family. So one was the brewers who keep the brewery going. One go into banking. Okay. And then there's a missionary wing. Right. Which I had never known before to the Guinness family. And lots of them, and they cross paths with Spurgeon and Whitfield and Hudson Taylor and all of these other missionaries, David Livingstone, all these guys. But loads of them forego great inheritance coming from the family line to go and serve in missionary contexts or as ministers and pastors. So yeah, there's a challenge. Follow the Guinnesses and make massive sacrifice. One of those sacrifices is taking time to study. So objection number 4, why waste 3 to 4 years of study when I could just launch straight into ministry work? Is gospel work not urgent? Why waste the time preparing and just go? So I've written a piece for Reformation Today a few months ago, just kind of a brief history and outlining of the work of the college. And one of the illustrations I used in it to talk about the necessity of the college for training for ministry is that what we need to produce are candles, not matches. And I think too many people are too keen to move too quickly into ministry, and they end up being like matches. They burn bright and hot, but it's over quickly. And whether that is they can't cut it in ministry, whether that's they disqualify themselves in some way, or whether that's just run out of steam or move on to something, it's just bright but disappears quickly. Whereas I think what we need are candles, people who will put down deep roots and foundations through study, preparing themselves, giving them a toolkit, and then after that they're able to burn brightly for decades because they have that grounding that equips them. And I think that's what our churches need. We need pastors who are going to survive decades. We need missionaries and church planters who are going to survive decades, not necessarily in one place, but will survive over the long run. And I think training is vital in that. Now, it doesn't guarantee you're going to survive in ministry, but I think it's vital in helping you survive. Do you have any thoughts on the necessity of that?
I think that's a helpful illustration. I would also say the 3 or 4 years that this person would be giving to theological training is back to what we've been saying at the start, Davy. It's about character formation. Yeah. And it's also about gaining as much wisdom as possible, not just about theology, the languages, historical theology, pastoral studies. It's actually a lot about learning about yourself and about how, you know, John Calvin says to know God and to know yourself are the 2 most important things in life. And so actually the emotional intelligence that you need to learn a lot about through being in a college like this, where there's real character formation, there's lots of prayer time, there's discipleship groups. You need to know a lot about yourself before you get out there.
For sure.
Like people who are, you know, we've got tutors and pastors who come in here, have had a lot of experience, and they're able to work with our students to help them see blind spots, to help them understand themselves. So yes, we could answer it and say, yes, you need a lot of time to think about all the theological questions you're going to be asked. But people really need to have a handle on themselves. And to be able to do that over 3 or 4 years, certainly to start the journey, I think it's hugely significant.
Yeah. I think some of the key things in that time for studying are spiritual formation, character building, and developing ministry friendships. And part of that is knowing who you are, knowing what friends you need, knowing your limitations, knowing what you're good at and what you're not so good at. All of that is part and parcel. I think one other thing I thought about as well is that God often works slowly and purposefully, which is often at odds to how we work, especially in the contemporary world. I don't know if it was different in generations before. Maybe we just like to pretend it was different. I'm not sure. But we run at breakneck speed in this world. No matter what sphere you're in, we run at breakneck speed. And yet that is not, I think, as far as the biblical record, and even some parts of church history, it's not how God works. He works slowly and purposefully, little by little. And I think setting aside time to study helps us think a little bit more about that, and kind of see God working in us, helping us understand ourselves, changing us, shaping us, equipping us and preparing us for what's to come.
Yeah, and I think even as you said earlier there, Davy, about friendships, you know, when many of our students who travel together, when they're coming from different parts of the island, you know, somebody says in the car on the way home, look, you seem to be struggling today in class, and that then the next 20 minutes in the car talking about their struggles, talking about their challenges, because the one thing that we will definitely bring with us into ministry is ourselves. And so all of those opportunities over tea, coffee, lunch, commuting are just so important.
So it's a whole lot more than just getting a degree and a piece of paper, the 3 years, isn't it?
Very much so, very much so.
Okay, objection number 5. It's the church's job to train people. So colleges, seminaries, they're not really necessary.
Well, it is the church's job to train people.
Amen, totally agree. It's the church's responsibility, yeah.
But in God's providence and sovereignty, He's also over the years raised up training centres like ours, like many others, to supplement. Some say it's whether the theological institutions come alongside the church or are under the church. I think we are there simply to support whatever analogy people want to use. We are there to support, and as we've talked about before, Davy, there are certain specialities that a working pastor probably shouldn't have, because they're just so immersed in so many different things. So it's unlikely that the normal pastor is going to be a Hebrew scholar and a Greek scholar and a historical theology scholar. Now, they may have an area of proficiency and interest, which is great, but that's where the Lord has sovereignly raised up institutions like ours, where we do have specialists to come alongside or under the church to help the church.
Yeah, I think that's so important to have people. I think in my training, like church history was something I didn't know a whole lot about, but it was so useful for me to be taught church history by those who knew it, and to come to the realization, well, I should have known this. The Bible tells us there's nothing new under the sun, and all of these heresies, they just keep reappearing in new guises, and to have that understanding was invaluable. But like you said, not every pastor, not every church has someone who knows church history in that kind of depth and can provide that. And yet, there's only so much you can learn in the classroom, and so the church is vital in that kind of real life situation, and helping students see that. Part of induction week, we just underscore that for the students, that we are not seeking to remove them from the local church, and that they, in fact, they must remain plugged into the local church, and if they don't, you're not preparing yourself for ministry. And so that's something that's significant and important for us, that connection and partnership with the local church. Anything else you want to say on that, Johnny?
No, I think you've answered it well, Davy.
So what we're saying, it's a both and, it's not neither or, and it takes both to kind of shape that person. Great. That's all 5 objections dealt with. Any final summary comments you want to make?
I think if the Lord is working on someone's heart, it is judicious and right for them to bring all the objections onto the table. Yeah. But I think if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're thinking about theological education, there will be a huge step of faith. And Hebrews 11 tells us, without faith, it's impossible to please God. So the Lord will not take all 5 objections and give you answers to them all. He may answer tangibly maybe 2 or 3 of them, but with the counsel of your local church leadership who know you, who know your life, if they are saying this is right and you feel it's right and you're called of God to do it, I think there'll be a couple of those objections that the Lord might not answer until certain times as part of the sanctifying process of stepping out in faith to serve Him.
Definitely. And I think hopefully that's come across today. We're not saying that these are silly objections or not to be thought about. We want to recognise each of them, and they're necessary of consideration by people who are thinking about studying. And we recognise that some of them are barriers to people actually studying, and that's right. But for some, it is that step of faith, and I think that's part of testing calling as well. If you believe the Lord is calling you into ministry or to serve Him in a particular way, there's going to be many of these small steps where you need to decide, I don't know what the future holds. I don't know how we'll survive the next 6 months. But the Lord's leading this way, and I got to take the next step and see what happens. And I think lots of the students who are with us, and lots of staff and faculty who have been through that process and gone into ministry and then are now with us in the college continuing to serve, their life has just been one endless string of steps into the unknown, trusting God to lead and guide.
Yeah, and I suppose just a final word from me, Davy, I would say the Bible is full of men and women who objected to going to serve God. You don't think Moses, who can I'm slow of speech. Think of Jeremiah and all his protestations, Isaiah. We could go to so many men and women in the Bible who argued with God, brought the objections to the table, but it's a well-worn quote, ultimately those whom God calls He's going to equip. There will be objections, there will be obstacles, but the Lord will provide what they need at that right time, not necessarily give them the roadmap for the future.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Johnny, thanks for your time. We're recording this in the final week of term, in the middle of a manic Monday. So thank you for your time. Thank you, listeners, for your time and for your support. And we ask that you continue to pray for us as a college and to continue to support and draw alongside as you do so well, so that together we might continue to magnify Christ, advance the gospel, and strengthen the church.